The PC Engine and TurboGrafx-16 were always peculiar platforms for many reasons. From its tiny size to its hybrid 8 and 16-bit architecture, there's no shortage of discussion points for the device. It also had an incredibly diverse library of game software that started all the way back in 1987 at its Japanese retail release. It was the first console available in and started the 4th generation. Because it was far more popular in Japan than it was anywhere else in the world, the PC Engine software list dwarfs its Western cousin. It also happened to include some of the most unique game releases around, and not always for the reasons you might think. In this episode, we will take a look at a group of games that I found very interesting on the PC Engine for one reason or another. I've got 10 of them for you, so let's get started. First up is the arcade classic R-Type, originally developed by Irem and then ported to the PC Engine by Hudson Soft in 1988. Now some of you might be sitting there thinking, what the heck is so odd or surprising about a simple port of a popular arcade title? This one is on the list because way back in 1988 when Hudson Soft ported it, R-Type 1 was released on a tiny 2 megabit hue card. It's not called R-Type 1 because it's the entire first game either. It's called R-Type Part 1 because it contains only the first 4 stages of the arcade original. Hudson Soft then released R-Type 2 3 months later in 1988, which contained the last 4 stages on another 2 megabit hue card. So, R-Type 1 and R-Type 2 on the PC Engine are not the first 2 games in the series at all. Instead, they are simply 2 parts that make up the whole of the very first game. When NEC Home Electronics published R-Type in the US for the TurboGrafx-16 in 1989, they combined these 2 games into one 4 megabit release. So while the Japanese needed 2 games to get the entire experience, US owners got it in one shot. The story takes another turn in 1991, when Irem released R-Type Complete CD for the PC Engine Super CD-ROM in Japan. This version is the entire game with additional cinematics and a CD soundtrack. That means that R-Type for the PC Engine has 4 different packages available for this one platform. Kinda makes you wonder if this is why R-Type never showed up on the Mega Drive. The PC Engine kinda monopolized the IP there during its popularity and could have had an impact on licensing deals. If you haven't played any of these R-Type releases, I recommend you check it out if you enjoy shoot 'em ups. It's a great port and even has an upgraded fan hack for the Super Graphics that minimizes a lot of the sprite flicker you've been seeing in this footage. The PC Engine port of Pac-Land was released in 1989 and was based on the original 1984 arcade edition by Namco. This one makes the list because of something I didn't understand until many years later. Pac-Land was released in 1984, a side-scrolling platformer that predates Super Mario Bros. Single-screen platformers had been around for years, but scrolling on-foot platformers, where you controlled the movement of the screen, was not something we had seen much of. The influence this must have had on gaming at the time would have been huge. There simply wasn't much like it. Even by 1989, when it showed up on the PC Engine, it was still a fun diversion away from the shoot 'em ups and hard-as-balls arcade ports that flooded the platform. It was based on the old cartoon series that showed up in the early 1980s and has gameplay that has Pac-Man helping fairies return home. Then he himself must get back to his family. The default gameplay has you using the 1 and 2 buttons to move left and right, but there is an option to switch that over to the directional pad. Enemies are usually in some type of vehicle you have to avoid, and you still have power pellets that allow you to eat them. The gameplay is heavily focused on avoiding obstacles instead of jumping on platforms. It was released on many console and computers over the years, but it was the PC Engine where I played it first. thought it looked the best, and learned about its history and influence in the industry. Today it's a great throwback to a simpler time, and something your young children can easily enjoy thanks to its easy pick up and play design. Sometimes a game just goes under your radar and you have no clue it was released. In 1991, Hudson Soft released Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu, a game I didn't know about until quite some time later. Heck, even then I just knew about the Japanese version because I still didn't know it had a US release. And what a cool little game it was. This is an action platformer where you must take Jackie through various terrain types like water, caves, and forests while trying to rescue your sister. It was initially available on the Nintendo Famicom before receiving a massively improved conversion to the PC Engine. Everything here takes advantage of the console's available color and has improved animations across the board for both the player and enemy sprites. It's got huge bosses, lots of martial arts moves to pull off, and even the music is pretty good. Don't let the cutesy visuals fool you either. This game gets quite challenging after a few levels, and you'll need some time with it to see the ending. For a licensed game like this, it was so much better than you would have figured. A great addition to the library that I'm glad I finally discovered. Give it a shot, and I think you will enjoy it as well. In 1992, Hudson Soft and Tecmo joined forces to bring the PC Engine a port of the NES classic Ninja Gaiden. When I saw this in magazines back then, I was really looking forward to playing it myself. But it makes this list not because of how shockingly good it was, but rather how surprisingly bad things turned out. The developers used the extra colors the PC Engine can display to some great effect on the foregrounds and sprites. Everything is brighter and bolder with many artistic changes done to the surrounding environment. And if things had stopped there, I would have said it was a fair port. But the background scrolling is utterly broken, the music is nowhere near as well done, and the gameplay feels way off. I am at a loss as to how anyone thought this was okay to release to the public in this state. The scrolling isn't just a distraction, but a genuine eyesore that makes it difficult to enjoy. It jitters, it shakes, and it pulverizes your tolerance. The hit detection is funky, and it's incredibly easy to get juggled by the enemy, even more so than the NES edition. I don't care how much of a fan you are of the PC Engine, this was an embarrassment. What could have been a fun and interesting diversion of that original comes off as more of an abomination that makes the hardware look weak and incapable. This one qualifies as both an oddity and a surprise for all the wrong reasons. To make things even sadder, this had a code to make the story fully playable in English. I could have dealt with some artistic and gameplay timing changes, but that scrolling destroys any desire to play this one seriously. The shoot-'em-up classic Choaniki and its sequel are on this list for a few different reasons. The original was developed by Messiah and released as a Super CD-ROM title in 1992. It immediately turned heads not just for its curious art direction, but also for its visual prowess. This sucker had some nice layered scrolling and sprites that were both huge and well animated. But it was its sequel in 1995 that took things to the next level. What had been comparatively conservative in the first went full-on homoeroticism in the second. And not just that, but the art mixed in surreal combinations of man and machine, resulting in imagery that was incredibly funny and disturbing at the same time. but for all of its uniqueness in terms of visual style, it still had the technical bells and whistles that made the first so pleasant to look at. Big sprites, awesome animations, and a background that has sections that scroll at different speeds, giving you some convincing layering. These games stood out on the PC Engine for lots of reasons and are still rather interesting today. The series went on to many other platforms, but it started for me right here on the PC Engine. "1993 was the year Hudson Soft and Westone decided to use the Sega Arcade release Riot City as a basis for their PC Engine Super CD-ROM game, Riot Zone. This isn't a direct port because it features many heavy variations in layout and art design, but the core gameplay is certainly recognizable. I always got a kick out of this because it's one of those games that Westone had the design rights to, so all they needed to do was change up the name, imagery, and presentation a bit, similar to differences you saw in games like Wonder Boy and Adventure Island. The arcade version was always something of an average affair even by 1991 standards when it was first released, and the PC Engine even more so by the time it showed up in 1993. It was such an odd game for Hudson to bring up when so many other better beat-em-ups were out there for a license. Hudson could have gone with a port of Final Fight from Capcom, Splatterhouse 2 from Namco, Night Slashers from Data East, or even Konami's Vendetta. Instead, they chose a middling experience that really had no chance at all of impressing anyone. It was known as Crest of the Wolf in Japan and makes this list for the sheer shock that nothing better was chosen to bring over to the PC Engine that late in its life. It isn't awful by any means, but there are dozens of better choices that would have been far more interesting. "1993 was also the year that Double Dragon 2 The Revenge was released for the PC Engine Super CD-ROM. This one gets the award for biggest surprise because it's nothing like what I was expecting. This game was done by Naxat, and like a lot of PC Engine games, it's loosely based on an arcade game of the same name. And just take a look at it. This is not the coin-op in any way, shape, or form. It has been rebuilt from the ground up similar to the NES edition, with heavy changes to just about everything. Gameplay, art, stage design, music, you name it, and it's different or tweaked in some way. One of the things that separates it from something like Riot Zone is that this is actually a very fun game that stands out on the PC Engine. You can't play it anywhere else, it's 2 players, and it has new cinematics to tell the story. I ended up adjusting to the look and feel of this one pretty quickly, and came to enjoy it far more than I was expecting. Don't shrug this one off just because it's not a direct conversion of the arcade, or it looks so different from its NES counterpart. There is fun here, and it's better than Riot Zone in every single way. The games in 1993 kept on coming, and that was when Street Fighter II Champion Edition showed up. The fact that this exists at all on a 20 megabit hue card is reason to celebrate and justifies its inclusion on this list. Let's do a quick fact check. The PC Engine was released in Japan in October of 1987. Folks, that was only about a month after the very first Street Fighter was released in the arcade. Street Fighter II didn't show up until early 1991, over 3 years after that. For this game to exist on this hardware, at this quality, is a testament to how well designed the PC Engine was. for it to even have a standing in the conversation when speaking of the Super Nintendo and Genesis editions is a badge of honor. While the sound and visuals are impressive in their own right, the gameplay is really where it gets my respect. Settle yourself in with a 6-button controller and this game plays fantastic. The only downside is that it was never released in the US, so you are stuck with the Japanese names and text. There's little to complain about otherwise. Even 6 years after the PC Engine was originally released, it was still showing it could provide a killer gaming experience.
Round 1, fight!
Godzilla was a one-on-one fighting game released for the Super CD-ROM and developed by Alpha System. This one makes the list because it came so close to being an incredible fighter at a time when everyone was appreciating the genre. I mean, it was a fighting game with giant monsters, how could it not be incredible? Well, it really wasn't, and it's one of those games that completely let me down. It's not terrible, but the sluggish gameplay, the completely unnecessary power meter, the simple 2-button interface, and the cheap AI really hammer it. It also has that thing where you can't play as any of the roster other than Godzilla in single player. You get access to the other 15 kaiju in multiplayer, but that's of little consolation if you're alone. It does have a choice of who you fight as you travel the map, but it's limited to just 2 options. It was also somewhat visually simple for a late Super CD-ROM game. The sprites are big, but the animation is lackluster, as are the cinematics sprinkled throughout that makes up its forgettable story. The backgrounds have no great color or detail scheme, and most of them are little more than some clouds in a barren landscape. I really did want to love this, but the end result just isn't all that appealing and lacks the fun factor to bring you back for more. If this had 6-button controller support, a move set that was more comfortable to pull off, gameplay that was a bit faster, and visuals with a touch more pizzazz, this mini review would have gone very much the other way. With this being so lackluster, it's still a mystery why Hudson chose to publish this in the US over something like Dracula X. Godzilla can be an outstanding IP, but time and time again, the video game form seemed to let me down. This Super CD-ROM was no different. When it comes to the oddballs in video games, you will not find any game more outstandingly strange than Steam Hearts. I didn't really discover this one until a Saturn version piqued my curiosity some years later. I found out that the console variations were remakes of the NEC PC-98 Computer Edition. And boy, what a wild story this thing has. The entire world has been infected by a virus that essentially drives everyone insane. That's where Blow and his hermaphrodite sister Fala come into play. Their job is to defeat the various female pilots throughout the game, where Fala will then hold them down and prepare them for Blow's seed. Yep, seems like rape is the only way to save the world in this one. The game itself has been heavily cut back from the computer version in regards to imagery, but there is still bits of nudity here and there. The biggest issue this one has is the giant score and status display on the right hand side of the screen, and some of the sub-weapons are missing. It's still challenging, the colors are bright and the music is decent, but as far as available versions, I'd rate this one the worst by quite a stretch. Outside of the cinematics, it just doesn't look all that great for a Super CD-ROM release. If you are looking for porn levels of explicit content, you won't find it here, and the shoot 'em up that you're left with is better played elsewhere. It's definitely a curiosity, however. It's the kind of software you never would have seen get a Western localization at the time, and this was the very first console version of it.
Welcome. Favor. Panel. Pisayo.
I wanted to do this episode because I always felt the TurboGrafx and PC Engine had a really interesting library. It was full of things many assumed it couldn't do. It had games that were much better than you expected, and it had a wide range of weirdness that really stood out at the time. This episode barely scrapes the surface of the software that could be included. If there's interest, I'll definitely do a part 2 and bring you even more games for this great platform. I'm also considering adding the PC Engine to my great visual effects line of episodes, where I show you games I thought had some pretty impressive visuals. With over 700 games in its library, there's a ton of stuff to cover and give opinions on, so be sure to check those out in the coming months. I'm Sega X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.